Hello, this is Lady Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage. And thank you for your support. I really appreciate your support. Today, I'm going to talk about something that we know about, but I think I'm going to bring some clarity to some and maybe just refresh the memory of others. And I'm talking about the document that ended slavery in the United States of America. Now, when you say the Emancipation Proclamation, people immediately think, yes, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery of a sort, but there were some real problems with the Emancipation Proclamation, and we need to talk about those problems with the Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the final Emancipation Proclamation. It stated, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as Commander in Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, do order and designate as the states and parts of states wherein the people thereof respectively are this day in rebellion against the United States, the following to wit, and he listed the states that were in rebellion: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. Those were the states that made up the Confederate States. They were the ones in rebellion against the United States, and the enslaved people in those states were freed under the Emancipation Proclamation. He continued, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are and henceforward shall be free. Such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States, and upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice warranted by the Constitution, up on military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. Now, what does all of that mean? Abraham Lincoln said that on January 1st of 1863, all persons held as slaves within those designated states, and those were states that had joined the Confederacy and that were fighting in rebellion against the United States. He said, all of those persons shall be free. Additionally, he said that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States. So he freed the enslaved people and he commissioned the enslaved people of suitable condition to be conscripted into the United States military. So the Emancipation Proclamation freed most of the enslaved people, but it did not free all of them. There were 4 border states that also had enslaved people that did not secede from the Union and join the Confederacy. So the enslaved people in the border states, and they are here in the stripes: Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, those enslaved people were not freed under the Emancipation Proclamation, because Lincoln's goal was not to free the slaves. His goal was to force those 11 states that had formed the Confederacy back into the Union. And he knew that by taking away the enslaved people, that would anger them. Interestingly enough, the enslaved people, even though they were living in Confederate states, they didn't see themselves as a part of the Confederacy. They saw themselves as part of the United States. So they felt like, on January 1st, 1863, we are free. And that was the goal of Abraham Lincoln. So the first problem with the Emancipation Proclamation is that it did not free all of the enslaved people. It freed the ones that were in the states that were fighting against the United States, but it did not free the ones that were in states that were not fighting against the United States. So that's the first problem with the Emancipation Proclamation. The second problem with the Emancipation Proclamation is that it was an executive order. An executive order is not binding legislation. An executive order is only as good as the president that signs it into law. When that president leaves office and another president comes into office, the new president can revoke that executive order. And we have seen that with Donald Trump, with executive orders that President Obama and President Biden signed. The new president can absolutely and legally and lawfully revoke an executive order if he doesn't agree with that law. So that was a serious problem with the Emancipation Proclamation. Because if the next president that came into office after Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, who was a racist and an enslaver himself, he almost certainly would have revoked the Emancipation Proclamation, and those people would have been ordered back into slavery. So the Emancipation Proclamation was a temporary solution to a long term problem. In order for the enslaved people to be permanently freed, there had to be an act of Congress, and that is where the 13th Amendment comes in. The 13th Amendment was passed by the Senate on April the 8th, 1864, and by the House of Representatives on January 31st, 1865, and was ratified by the required 27 of the then 36 states on December 6th, 1865. And this was the first of the three Reconstruction amendments that were adopted following the American Civil War. Those three amendments were directly related to the enslaved people. The 13th Amendment freed them. The 14th Amendment gave them citizenship, due process, and equal protection under the law. And the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. I don't think it hurts for us to review these things because so many people are coming into this country and they really think they have rights that they don't have. And they'll be saying stuff like, well, they need to follow the Constitution. They need to follow the Constitution. And they don't even know what the Constitution says. Some people think that just because they think something is right, that's in the Constitution. It may not be in the Constitution. But for us, as American citizens, as descendants of slavery, it's important for us to know what our rights are because we are embedded in the Constitution. And so we should not be ignorant of our rights and what the Constitution says about who we are and what our stance is as American citizens. So let's just remember that the Emancipation Proclamation did something. It boosted the morale of the enslaved people and it gave them a reason to hope. But they really needed the Congress of the United States to secure their freedom. And that is where the 13th Amendment comes in. Okay, y'all, thank you for listening. Let me know what you think about the video and have a good evening.